Thank you, David. I just came from an international conference, and then usually after each presentation, then somebody said, "Thank you for your interesting presentation," although it was not interesting. So I'm not going to say thank you for your interesting presentation, I'm going to say thank you for your presentation. And by this I mean that it was really opening minds and rethinking about how sustainable mobility, how we should be dealing with this, both from an academic side as from a policy side. If I look back at, I missed the second presentation, but I saw the slides. If I look back at the three presentations on the whole, I think you did an excellent job. So thank you very much for accepting our offer and giving us this very interesting. We have time for some questions. Not sure whether you feel up to this, because we have the tea, but we would like to open the floor at least for a couple of questions and to have some thoughts of you. Luc, I'm very happy that you want to ask the first question, so go ahead.
Yes, because I've heard when I asked the first question I could get a drink for free. But,
you get a second drink.
A second drink. It was an interesting presentation, but you end up, I think, a little bit with a kind of political economic agenda. You want to shorten global supply chains, you want to increase local production and collaborative consumption areas. I've been busy with, I'm a planner, I've been busy with exploration approaches for 10 years now, and I'm not so optimistic about that. Perhaps that's too far. Because if you want to shorten trips, you say, shorten global change, the first thing you should do, I think, to get rid of a borderless economic of the European Union or something like that. Because when it is neoliberal, when it is a network society, then we will have the production where it is the cheapest, and then you get long global supply chains. So it is a little bit awkward that you give your lecture in terms of BIVEC. That's Benelux club, borderless Dutch. So, how do you think about that? So, when you come up with, in the end, as part of the economic agenda, then it will be a major change in what we are in the global society where you've written.
Yeah, I think yes, very powerful argument. So I always say at this sort of stage, if I knew the answers to all the questions that I have and probably people here have, I wouldn't be here. I'd be somewhere else, and I wouldn't say making money, but be somewhere else trying to do it. I think yes, but I wouldn't suggest putting up all borders, although maybe, I don't know, there may be certain parts of Europe that might want to do that. I mean, we have our own debates at the moment with Scotland as to whether they wish to go their separate way or not. But I think it's impossible to get away completely from the economic paradigm, in the sense that revolution is probably not on the agenda. But one still finds at the moment that things that have been done by, as it were, exporting it to the cheapest place is now being brought back onshore. That these things, I mean, one example I suppose would be the outsourcing of telephone answering services. In the UK, I don't know whether they do it in Benelux countries, but in the UK it's done to India. So when you went to your telephone inquiries, you, in typical British context, you say, "What's the weather like?" And they say, you get a response from Mumbai that it's 37 degrees or something like that. So you say, where are these people talking from? But things do go out and they do come back. There are ways, I think, and this is happening. I mean, the sort of the word dematerialization has got into the sort of common parlance, and it's sort of used in slightly different ways. The way in which I use it is that we you can export the knowledge, or you can move the knowledge around, and you produce locally. It's one way in which one can do that. So you take Pepsi Cola or something, you don't produce Pepsi Cola or whatever variant it is in one place. You export the secret formula, which is water plus sugar, and then you make it in various different places. Okay, so you can. There are ways in which you can do that, and there's also obviously it's not just price; it's quality as well. Increasingly, probably quality becomes more important. I know a lot of things I've been talking about do have. I mean, the accounting is another, which is if you're looking at emissions accounting, not necessarily where it's produced but where it's consumed. That again has potentially quite big implications if there's going to be a transfer of funds and that sort of thing ensuing from that. So I'm not saying tear up Adam Smith, but I think that one is actually thinking that there are other things that need to be thought about. And I think the point I was trying to make in the presentation as well is that long supply chains may not be the most resilient, robust ways in which in the future that we should be organising things. So we know with the example, say in Thailand, where they had flooding, and we suddenly found, when nobody knew that 60% or some quite high percent of hard drives were made there, and there was a world shortage of hard drives at that time, that and the price went up by 30 or 40%. Perhaps that wasn't such a good place to actually locate that sort of production. So I think it's not saying with all of these things that one says no to that and yes to this. It's having a debate about where it's most sensible to actually do these things. And that's part probably both of, in the governance sense, of governments, and maybe that's where global governance has a strong role to play, but also business as well. That businesses need to be looking much more towards corporate social responsibility and corporate economic, environmental responsibility as well as profit. And that is all part of what I think needs to be thought about in terms of. So it's not putting up barriers. It's, I think, just thinking a little bit more around the issues that we're now confronting. I'm not sure that answers your question.
Every answer gives new questions.
Yeah.
Let's first see whether other people have questions as well. Thomas and then Peter.
Regarding the role of scientists, well, at least part of the audience are scientists, and policymakers too should know what the role of science is. There is a mix of what is the basic question of science, what can be or can be done, and what should be. And it's a difficult role as a scientist. You have theories that explain reality, and well, we refer to Kuhn and some other philosophers of science. But also you present something like sustainable mobility, which is sustainability is a category of the good, it's about the good life, and you refer to Skidelsky's in your first lecture.
Yeah.
So it's also a normative statements you make. But as a scientist, if I transfer myself into my role as a promoter of sustainable mobility, am I still a scientist?
Mm-hmm.
And I agree that a person can be both. That's in the weekend I can be a transition manager or something, and then during the week a scientist, but yeah, is it something normative? And if I'm confused, will other people be confused about their role?
Yeah. I mean, it's a really difficult question to answer. And I think it's problematic. I think there's two areas which I think are really quite difficult. Which I thought you were going to say, which is where does science end and policy begin? So, and in the past, I would probably say that scientists have tended to be rather cautious in that. Here is the science. You are the policy makers. You make sense of the science, and it's up to you to actually do that. And more recently, and this has caused a lot of, I think, debate within IPCC and other organisations, is that they ought to be moving it a little bit further in terms of helping policymakers, and there you have rather a difficult sort of interface between what is science and how do you communicate that science, and how much of the story do you actually tell? Do you just leave it as it is, or do you add any sort of interpretation on it? Okay, so I think there's a very grey area there, which is a really important area. And as a scientist, I suppose, and looking at scientists, there are very few who are really good at communicating that science in terms of getting people to understand what it is that it's actually doing. There's also related to that, the notion that science is not absolute, although it is absolute in its own terms, but until something else comes along and says this is better science, or this is a better way of looking at that problem, particularly where one is involved in issues relating to policy rather than necessarily how atoms may react or how things may react together. And the role of the academic, I think, is again quite a problematic one, because if one is just talking about the science, and particularly if it's social science, where it's quite soft and or can be quite soft in its formatting, is to say, right, well, where does the actual science end, and where do we actually try and then apply it, or should we not try and apply that to real-world problems? So, for instance, I could talk about the first half of my lecture, or the first third part of it, which says what various thinkings have done on this, and then not try and interpret that within the context that I am interested in, which I think would be much to the diminution of both science and society, or how that can actually set up. So I think my position is that scientists have a responsibility to be able to communicate what they're studying to society, particularly in many cases as those scientists are publicly funded. So they have a responsibility to both the funding agency, and often that's the public sector. Where I work at Oxford, both in the TSU, the Transport Studies Unit, and in the larger unit we have in the same department, the ECI, the Environmental Change Institute, it's built into their credo, their terms of reference, is this link between science and society. So they don't put it in terms of policy, but science and society. So their argument is that it's no good having the science if we can't relate it to societal problems, and we can't then communicate that science to society. Whether that takes it further and makes it political or policy, in that sense, I'm not sure, but I think that's the important area. We can't, or I feel we can't withdraw from that. Do you agree? Or do you think the science is totally
communication
different?
is important, but there is also, somewhere a difference between communication and telling politicians what they should do. Are investments in new tram infrastructure good? We can list costs and benefits, socially and economically based, but should the tram link be built? Scientists tend to speak like, yes, you have to invest in new tram infrastructure. Is this a statement made by scientists or by citizens?
But good news, it's not actually saying a tram system or something, it's saying if we were to invest in, better quality transport for this city, then the world that science would have would be to look at a range of different opportunities, of which tram might be one of those. And then it would say, right, well, these are the advantages and disadvantages of each of these. So in a sense, it's trying to, set out the different options or combinations of, but also hopefully generating new thinking that might be ideas that the people who are interested in the tram system might not have thought about, which might involve the tram, might not involve the tram. Okay, so perhaps with the specificity, if you're saying either yes or no, I think that's a bit too clear cut for me. I think it's a little bit more nebulous than that. But then that would again relate to what are the objectives that whoever it is, the bus company or the tram company or the city government is trying to achieve for its people in the city. There may be other ways that are better than building a tram link. They may still build a tram link.
Peter.
I'm working, a lot of colleagues in this present are working for local authorities as well. So we are from the city of Ghent, some are from the city of Antwerp. And we are doing sustainable mobility, the usual stuff, like we talked about walking, cycling, public transport. But according to you, what would be your recommendations to local authorities on the new issues, on the out-of-the-box solutions? What would be, let's say, your top 3 recommendations for local authorities to shift their point of view from the normal way of working on sustainable mobility into the new way of looking?
Mm-hmm. I don't know what my top 2 or 3 tips will be, but I think the concept of transport as a service is I think, one that is important. Questioning the role of the car in the city would be another, whether that's done through pricing or done through restriction or certain types of vehicles. And the third, I think, from what I was saying today, would be to look at how the total stock of transport can actually be better used across all of the sectors within the city, which is more of an organisational, institutional issue that needs to be thought about. I mean, we're in discussions at the moment with Oxfordshire County Council, which is the public authority that's responsible not just for the city of Oxford, but for the whole area around it, about how they can integrate the transport that's available under the jurisdiction of different public agencies more effectively across the whole county. So, you know, people, I think, so, and to come back to what we were saying before, one thing I desperately try not to do is to be prescriptive about to sort of say what should happen anywhere. I would be the first to admit every place, every city, and this is one of the real joys of being in cities and living in cities, are different to each other. They have different sets of problems and different sets of solutions. So the one you might think is good for Ghent won't perhaps be so good for Antwerp or somewhere. So there are different ways of doing things, but it's really having that sort of debate. And I think that city governments and city planners and others are being, I think, much more open and much more engaged in that process than I feel they have been in the past. That they realise that what's happening, that we need to be doing something that is rather different to what's been going on in the past, and they're looking wherever they can get help or advice or someone they can have a conversation with that might help them in looking at slightly different ways forward.
Other comments? Yes, please.
Regarding autonomous vehicles, and then I mean the ones without a human driver, how and when do you see them fitting into the sustainable future?
Yeah, I had this, it's not an uncommon question. We had this, at Oxford, we had this group, Paul Newman's group, that runs a Nissan Leaf, it's an autonomous vehicle. That's when it's working, sort of thing. And never actually been in it, but I've seen the videos of it. And there's rather a nervous person who's sitting behind this wheel, and this wheel's moving, and this person's just about to grab it and then remembers that that's not what he's meant to be doing, and goes round this circuit. The interesting thing about the Oxford experiment is that it uses off-the-shelf technology. So it uses lasers and camera technology. So it looks at the vision in front of it. So it costs about, I'm not sure that's total, but it's something like 300 or 400 euros to convert it from a normal vehicle to autonomous. So it's using readily available off-the-shelf which is rather different to what Google's doing, which is with their GPS located thing, it's $250,000 or something like that, dollars or something, to actually, it's quite expensive. And the problem with that is that, as well with GPS, that you get blind spots, or you can get blind spots in cities in particular, where the GPS is not so good. So the camera technology is what this guy argues is a better way of doing that. I'm old-fashioned, I suppose, and I've not yet been convinced, but my engineering colleagues will say 10 years is a realistic sort of thing. But I think they've then sort of qualified it, and it's like with a lot of innovations, one has in one's mind's eye what an autonomous vehicle is, which is the completely autonomous vehicle you have effectively takes away, say, 90 or 95% of the driving functions from the driver. But there will be various stages, and we already got various of those stages, whether it's cruise control, whether it's sort of things that changes gears and things, whether it's parking warning or hazard warning and that sort of thing. There are various innovations that are occurring. So it's where the threshold is, where it morphs, as it were, from a conventional vehicle into, say, an autonomous vehicle. There's also the argument that he sort of talks about, I think, quite strongly, is that it might make driving more people will be able to drive, because one of the main beneficiaries of autonomous vehicles might be the elderly, for instance, because maybe low speeds that may actually help there. It should be reduce accidents very substantially, crashes very substantially. And it seems that they've probably got around some of the legal problems, which was if something went wrong, who was actually liable for it. So I think in America they've actually got the people working with autonomous vehicles to take out very substantial bonds, which would cover any eventuality should it happen. But I'm not sure if that's going to be a solution for everybody else. But if you take away all the driving functions, and these vehicles can drive down roads and use the capacity much better, you could in fact drive them up and form a train. Road train? Or is that?
I was thinking that it would be very compatible with a service-based transport system in which one autonomous vehicle is shared by many people and drives from one place to another, picks up another person, along the way picks up a third person, etc.
Yeah, there's all sorts of...
As cars are made standing still 80% of the time now, so there's huge advantages.
Yeah, but you don't really need an autonomous vehicle to do that. Or were you thinking, I'm thinking an autonomous vehicle in a vehicle that drives itself?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean you could do that, picking up people and that sort of thing. As I was saying earlier, there's somebody was saying in Portugal to me recently, there's software that if you're using a route guidance system, you're following that in your vehicle from one place to another, and there's somebody walking, and they find out that you're going roughly the direction and you've got space in your car, there's a possibility of giving them a lift. Okay? Yeah, you just think a little bit, sort of. So there are all sorts, I think. So, and it could be, that's effectively rounded, but it could be along designated routes or something like that. There's all sorts of ways in which we can make much better use of the empty space in cars.
Final question, Chris, you have one? No? So you like this, no? Yes, please, go back.
My name is Martin Servais. I work for the Federal Public Transport and Mobility, and I have a question about freight. If I understand well, I think if we look at freight in Belgium, you can only look at the two boxes on the right. You see modal split and efficiency of the transport system of vehicles. And we have very little impact on what is on the left. Choice of distances, choice of production, or is that not a good way of looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes. I mean, the diagram is really being developed for the passenger sector, rather than explicitly for the freight sector. Although I would say that the issue relating to distance as well. I mean, if you've got your distribution network, do you do that if you say, I don't know, a retailer or something, do you do that from an out-of-town place or from a larger depot elsewhere? So there are different ways in which you can do the final distribution of freight in terms of the journey length. So I think there is potential there, but probably in terms of the trips, well, maybe the trips as well. I mean, I don't know. I haven't really looked at this, but I mean, there's. I'm just trying to think through. If you say you've got, say, in the UK or something like that, most of the large supermarkets do internet shopping and delivery. Whether all of those delivery vans are actually full all the time. Probably they're getting that way because of the rise in the use of internet for shopping. So it's saying, are there ways in which we could, say, organise the delivery between the different supermarkets to allow each of those vans to start off full and to then work on an algorithm that would minimise the total distance that van would actually need to travel to deliver all of those goods, and perhaps pick things up to take them back. I don't know. But I think, yes, you're probably right, that it's technology, particularly load factors, is important, and to some extent shifting freight onto more efficient, to perhaps to rail or water. So maybe something on distance, but I think you may be right that freight may be more to the right-hand side than people.
Okay, there are no more questions, then we like to end here and do something unconventional, that is take 4 o'clock tea at 3:45, but it's at the first floor, so perhaps if you take 15 minutes to walk in the wrong direction, you will be there at 4. But I would like to end by thanking, first of all, David again, and also thanking Veronique, who is sitting in the back, who is co-organizing this, so a big thanks to both.